Inner Wealth Management, the Buddha's 4 Principles for Spiritual Riches. There's a line of thinking that divides the Buddha's teachings into 2 very separate categories. One is his teachings for lay people, aimed at finding happiness in this lifetime and in future lifetimes. And then there are the teachings for the monastics, aiming at dismantling the cycle of birth and rebirth and rebirth and rebirth, and getting out of that cycle entirely. The 2 sets of teachings, they say, are very separate. In the first, you're amassing merit, and in the second, you're letting it go. But from the point of view of the forest tradition, there's not that clear a distinction. In fact, there are many lessons that you learn from teachings for finding happiness in daily life that apply to the practice all the way up to the highest levels. This is one of the reasons why the training is such as it is, where there's so much emphasis placed on keeping the monastery clean, looking after the monastery, repairing it, doing the work that needs to be done. As Ajahn Mahabua liked to point out, if you do this intently, you develop the quality of intentness. You develop the qualities of being careful, being meticulous, being observant, all of which are going to be really useful in the practice. A case in point is the Buddha's teachings on how to find happiness in the present life. They're aimed primarily at using your outer wealth properly, but they can be applied to inner wealth as well. There are 4 principles altogether. The first is initiative. You don't just sit there waiting for things to come. You don't say that I'm going to go past my greed by not doing any work at all. That, as Ajahn Lee would say, is letting go like pauper. You let go, and you're still a pauper. When you realize that you need wealth, you do whatever is needed. As the Buddha said, your wealth is earned with the strength of your arms, the sweat of your brow. Righteous wealth, righteously gained. You look for areas where wealth can be made in that way, and then you apply yourself. You stir up the effort. When you've gained wealth, the second step is to protect it. You look after it. You repair the things that need to be repaired. You protect the things that need to be protected. You look after your things. If things get lost, you look for them. You don't treat them casually. The third step is to use your wealth in an even way. Even here means that you're not too frugal and you're not too spendthrift. It's interesting that the Buddha criticizes being overly frugal. You would think that he would be a very frugal person, and he was frugal in a lot of ways. But he realized that if it gets to the point of being stingy, then it's bad for you. You develop a bad attitude toward the enjoyment of pleasure. If you see the enjoyment of pleasure as a bad thing, it's going to be hard to practice. After all, Nibbana is the ultimate pleasure. Right concentration is a very strong form of pleasure. It's going to require a lot of work to get it, but if you're not willing to enjoy pleasure, and then you see other people enjoying it, and you decide it's a bad thing, it's hard to develop empathetic joy. It's hard to have the right attitude toward happiness. So you use your wealth just right. You don't get into debt, and you don't spend it too much. You save some for the future. The fourth quality is to have admirable friends, people who will teach you about the fact that there's more to this life than just material wealth. You want to prepare for the future beyond the end of this life. If your friends are admirable, they teach you about conviction. They teach you about discernment, generosity, virtue. They themselves are good examples in these areas. When you hang around people like this, you use your wealth wisely. You invest it not only in your pleasure in this lifetime, but also in your well-being in future lifetimes. Now, those are the principles that are set out for finding happiness in the present life, but they also apply very much to our meditation, initiative. If you don't put the effort in, it's not going to happen. When problems come up, you don't just give up. Remind yourself that other people have faced problems like this in the past, and they were able to get past them. It's not beyond human capabilities to get the mind to settle down and to keep it settled down. Of course, we're taking your wealth here as your concentration. The Buddha also says that there's the wealth of goodwill. Goodwill is something you can create in abundance. There's no limit on the amount of goodwill you can create, and it's good and soothing for the mind. It's also one of those things that helps the mind get into concentration. If you have ill will for the people around you, that's going to carry into your meditation and spoil it. So develop goodwill as wealth. Develop concentration as wealth, and regard the problems that come up in concentration as challenges and not as obstacles. You run into pain. In Ajahn Lee's image, it's like digging down into the ground. You know there's gold someplace in the ground, but you happen to run into a rock. Lazy people, when they hit the rock, would just give up. It's the people with initiative who figure out that there must be a way around the rock, who will find the gold. You dig here and you dig there, you finally get past the rock, and there it is. So you're willing to dig around in the problem of pain. Don't let it discourage you. The same with distraction. There are ways of dealing with distraction. You try to recognize when the distraction comes, how it comes, and realize that when it's there, it doesn't stay there 24/7. It comes and then it goes, but then you dig it up again. Why did you do that? What was the reason? This is where you get to see the allure, why the mind goes for that. Then you can compare the allure with the drawbacks until you see that it's not worth it. That's when you develop some dispassion for it, get past it. So there are ways of dealing with the problems that come up. You want to take the initiative to keep working at them and not get discouraged. The fact that it sometimes takes a long time is not a sign that you're not going to be able to do it. It's simply a sign that you've got a problem you haven't figured out yet. But all the problems that come up in meditation are soluble. The one problem that really puts you at a dead end is if you get lazy and you don't do it. As Ajahn Fuang used to say, when you do the meditation, whatever comes up, there's going to be a solution. But if you don't do the meditation, there's no solution for any of the problems. So maintain your initiative. Keep giving yourself pep talks, because this can be done. Once you start getting results, then you try to maintain them. Don't throw them away, and don't see them as something that you maintain only while you're sitting here with your eyes closed, or while you're doing walking meditation. As you go around the monastery throughout the day, try to maintain your center. Protect this. There may be other things that you're tempted to protect, but you say, no, this is what I've got to protect above all else. This is what's important. Ajahn Lee says, it's like having a dish of food. You want to cover the dish so that flies don't get it. If you carry it around exposed, all kinds of bugs will land on it and bring disease into the food, so you protect your center. Find one spot in the body that's very sensitive to the breath, that tells you that this is when the breath is getting too long. This is when it's getting too short. If any fear comes up in the mind, any greed, any negative emotion that gives rise to a tightening in that spot, you try to maintain that as an open area. Think of the breath coming in, going out. To protect that openness, don't clamp down around it. We often think that by clamping down on the energy around the body, we protect it. We don't. Your mindfulness is the protection. Your alertness is the protection. The continuity of your mindfulness and alertness, those are the protections. The openness is actually a strength. As for using your wealth, you do want to focus on the breath in such a way that gives rise to a sense of pleasure. Actively cultivate that. Don't be afraid of getting stuck on the pleasure of concentration, because you have to get stuck here first so that you can pull away your attachments to unskillful thoughts. Thoughts of sensuality, thoughts of ill will, fearful thoughts, jealous thoughts. You want to give the mind good food so that it can stop feeding on its old garbage, but you have to be careful with that sense of well-being. Don't leave the breath and just wallow in the pleasure. You have to remember that the sense of pleasure associated with the breath comes from the fact that you're alert to the breath, that you're paying careful attention to the breath. Ajahn Lee's image is of someone who's working and gaining a wage at the same time. If you work for a while, get your wages, and then quit the job to enjoy your wages until they run out, and then you come back and try to get the job back again. Fortunately, in this case, the boss is kind and will take you back. But there's no continuity. When there's no continuity, there's no chance for the meditation to grow, to develop, no chance for advancement. So you keep working with the breath, enjoying the side effects, but don't move your primary focus away from working with the breath. Remember your initiative. Ajahn Lee talks about the work of concentration, which is basically directed thought and evaluation, constantly checking on the breath, making sure it's just right, learning how to maintain it, learning what to do with it, how to use it to nurture yourself. There will be times when you don't need to do the directed thought and evaluation anymore, and you can just put them aside. But even then, there's the work of mindfulness, just being alert to breath. You're feeling surrounded by the breath, feeling a one with the breath. The pleasure will be there at the same place, but don't shift your focus away from the breath to the pleasure. That's how you use your wealth properly. And as for hanging out with good friends, this applies both outside and inside. Your inside good friends are all the voices encouraging you to practice. The bad friends you've got to avoid are the ones that would pull you away for one reason or another. Your old concerns, the ones that would eat into your meditation. You've got to realize that your focus on the breath is your main source of wealth here, your main source of well-being. You don't know what's going to happen in the future, but you do know that you'll need inner strength to deal with whatever comes up. This is the wealth you've got to protect. This is the wealth you've got to maintain. So any voices in the mind that help you with that, those are your good friends. Any voices that would pull you off into other issues, those are not. So remember that the qualities that lead to happiness on the material level in line with the Dhamma will have a carryover effect as you meditate. This means that as you go through the day and you're doing your chores around the monastery, or if you're living at home doing your chores around the house, you want to bring a quality of initiative and intentness to what you're doing. Give it your full attention. Do it carefully. This applies to looking after the physical aspects of the monastery, whatever your chores may be, whatever your duties may be. You want to develop that habit of being careful about what you're doing, having a sense of just right in all of your tasks, and then apply that to your meditation. Because after all, it's the same mind. The mind that's going around looking after the monastery is the same mind that's looking after the breath and the mind. If you develop good habits in one area, they're going to spread to the other. This may be part of what Luang Pudun meant when he said, "The practice of Dhamma is all one thing clear through." Determined on the sublime attitudes. This evening, there was a large spider in my room. I've seen bigger. I've told you the story of Ajahn Fuang with the snake. This spider has been there for 2 days, so I let it stay. This evening, though, I figured, okay, That's enough. So with a lot of goodwill, I caught the spider and released it out into the trees. I don't love that spider, but I wished it well. I mention this just to make the point that metta, or goodwill, doesn't necessarily mean loving kindness. Tonight, I'd like to discuss the ways in which you can use the topics we've been discussing. In particular, the 3 fabrications and the 4 determinations, in the practice of developing the sublime attitudes, or Brahma Viharas. Because this is a meditative practice, you can meditate while we talk. The Brahma Viharas are the practice of developing unlimited goodwill, unlimited compassion, unlimited empathetic joy, and unlimited equanimity. Goodwill means wishing for happiness. Compassion is what goodwill feels when you see beings who are suffering, hoping that they will be released from their suffering. Empathetic joy is what goodwill feels when you see people who are already happy. You want them to continue in their happiness. Equanimity means being unshaken emotionally when you realize that there are a lot of people who are doing things that are unskillful, that you cannot change, and you can't let yourself get upset by that. Sometimes we're given the impression that desire and determination don't play much of a role in developing these attitudes. In particular, we're told that unlimited goodwill comes naturally to the mind, that all you have to do is let the mind reveal its innate nature, and it'll feel goodwill for all. That, however, is not how the Buddha explained the issue. As he said in the Karanya Metta Sutta, the attitude of universal goodwill is something you have to make an effort to keep in mind. It's a form of mindfulness that you have to be determined on. This means that universal goodwill and the other attitudes are not innate. They're called Brahma Viharas for a good reason. Brahmas are high levels of devas who have developed these attitudes and who dwell in them. We human beings don't dwell innately in these unlimited attitudes. Our goodwill, compassion, etc. tend to be partial. We easily feel them for some beings, but not for others. To say nothing of human beings, even lower levels of devas don't have these universal attitudes. There's a story in the canon of a leper who sees the Buddha giving a talk. First he thinks, "Oh, there must be a food distribution here. Let me go and see if I can get some food." As he goes closer, he realizes there's no food, but that the Dhamma is being taught. So he sits down and listens to the Dhamma. The Buddha focuses on him. As the leper listens to the talk and reflects on the Dhamma, he becomes a stream enterer, which is the first level of awakening. He dies soon after and becomes a deva. And now he's a deva who outshines all the other devas on that level. But instead of being happy about this, the other devas resent it. How did they let these lepers into our place? So even devas don't have universal goodwill, to say nothing of human beings. Human goodwill tends to be partial. You wish for the happiness of those who are good to you and to people you love, but it's easy to feel ill will toward those who have harmed you or those whom you care about. We don't need the Buddha to point this out to us. We can see this clearly in other people's behavior and in our own hearts and minds. This is why unlimited goodwill is something you have to be determined on developing. 2 levels of desire are involved here. Goodwill in and of itself is a desire for happiness, and for it to become unlimited, you have to desire to develop that unlimited mind state within your own mind. Both of these desires, to become well established, involve all 4 aspects of a skillful determination: discernment, truth, relinquishment, and calm. Discernment plays a major role in all of the Brahma Viharas. figuring out what they mean, figuring out why they would be conducive to your long-term welfare and happiness, knowing how to foster them, and knowing which Brahmavihara is appropriate for each occasion. Here it's worthwhile to stop and think about the question the Buddha says lies at the beginning of discernment. What, when I do it, will lead to my long-term welfare and happiness? This shows that goodwill is inherent in true discernment. You want your happiness to be long-term, and you realize that if it depends on afflicting others, it won't last. So you wish for their happiness as well. The Brahmaviharas fall into two sorts. Those that express a wish, this would include goodwill, compassion, and empathetic joy. And then the one, equanimity, that accepts the fact that your desires can't always be fulfilled as you would like, and that you have to learn how not to suffer from that fact. You may have noticed, if you've looked in the chanting book, that the translations of the first three Brahmaviharas are expressed as wishes, may, whereas the last one is simply a statement of fact. All beings are the owners of their actions. That's the correct translation. A couple of years ago, we found that there was an incorrect translation in an earlier edition of the book here, saying, "May all beings inherit the results of their actions." It sounds like a curse. So now it's been corrected as simply a statement of fact. Discernment has to understand that all the Brahmaviharas will train both the heart and the mind. The mind is needed to figure them out. The heart involves an act of will. You have to figure out what each of the Brahmaviharas means, how to foster it, and how to get the heart to want it. Let's start with metta. Metta means goodwill, not love or loving kindness, because from the Buddha's point of view, love is partial and unreliable. If you love someone, and someone else is good to that person, you'll love that second person too. If a person mistreats someone you love, you'll hate that person. If there's somebody you hate, and somebody else mistreats that person, you'll love that second person. And if someone treats that person well, you'll hate that person. That's why love is not a universal attitude. It contains a lot of clinging and partiality, and can carry hatred in its wake. Basically, metta is a wish that other beings be happy, and that you be happy too. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have any relationship with those beings. I've told you the story of the Ajahn Fuang and the snake. There's also a story in the canon. A monk is sitting under a tree meditating. A snake falls out of the tree, lands on him, bites him, and kills him. The monks go to the Buddha to deliver this news. The Buddha said that the monk had died because he hadn't spread goodwill to all the families of snakes. Apparently, there are 4 main families of snakes. At any rate, the Buddha then teaches the monks a chant for spreading goodwill to the snakes. It starts with the 4 families of snakes and then goes to all beings, including all the creepy, crawly things you can think of. Then it says, "May they be happy. May they meet with good fortune. And may they go away." That's not necessarily love, it's simply goodwill. Now sometimes you hear metta is defined as acceptance, saying, "I accept you." But that's a pretty low bar. If someone were to say to me, "I accept you," I might respond, "Why should I care? I'd prefer that you want me to be happy." Metta is actually a matter of respect, and it involves 2 kinds of respect. First is respect for the desire for happiness. That desire is what defines people. So when you're wishing that people be truly happy, you're sympathizing with the best versions of what they are and what they can be. The second object of respect is respect for the principle of karma, realizing that lasting happiness has to come from skillful actions. It can't come just from good wishes. This is why we say, when spreading thoughts of metta, "May you understand the causes for true happiness, and be willing and able to act on them. The teaching on karma actually plays a role in 3 issues related to goodwill. First is understanding how universal goodwill would lead to your long-term welfare and happiness. Second is understanding the role of desire in fabricating goodwill. Third is understanding how to skillfully go about expressing the wish for happiness. Second is understanding the role of desire in fabricating goodwill. Third is understanding how to skillfully go about expressing the wish for happiness. 1. First point. Universal goodwill leads to your long-term welfare and happiness, both in relation to how it would induce you to create good karma now and in the future, and also in relation to the karma you've done in the past. In terms of present and future karma, if you have ill will for anybody, you're going to harm them easily. That's going to become your bad karma. So to protect yourself from yourself, you try to have goodwill for all. The image he gives is of a large lump of salt. If you put the lump of salt into a small cup of water, you can't drink the water because it's too salty. But if you put it into a large river of clean water, then you can still drink the water of the river because the salt has been diluted into so much water. So that's why the practice of universal goodwill can lead to your long-term welfare and happiness. It protects you from bad karma, past, present and future. 2. As for the role of desire in fabricating goodwill, that's a kind of karma in itself. You do this because you need it. If you feel ill will for anyone, you're bound to behave unskillfully toward that person, and that will then become your own bad karma and lead to your own unhappiness. So you talk to yourself about this, and you give mental images to emphasize this point, so that you'll want to develop universal goodwill. You want a happiness that harms no one. If it harms you, it's going to lead to aimlessness and depression. If it harms others, they'll try to destroy that happiness. So you have to remind yourself that you're offering protection for yourself and for others. This, of course, involves verbal fabrication, but actually, all 3 kinds of fabrication are involved. You try to make the breath as calm and comfortable as possible, because if the way you breathe is aggravating, it's going to be hard to wish for the happiness of others. You have to talk to yourself, using directed thought and evaluation. You remember some of the lessons we talked about this morning, about the bandits with the 2-handled saw, and about the nature of human speech. You can also use mental fabrications such as perceptions, like the perception of your metta as being large like the earth, like the river Ganges, and like space. You can also call to mind the image of the mother loving her only child. I'd like to emphasize again what that image means. It's often mistranslated as saying that you should love all beings the same way that a mother would love her only child. Instead, it actually says you should protect your goodwill as a mother would protect her only child. In other words, you realize that your goodwill is valuable. The Buddha explicitly calls it a form of wealth. And it's a kind of wealth that you can create all the time. It's as if you have your own treasury, your own mint. Unlike the money of the world, the more you print the wealth of goodwill, the higher its value because it gives you protection all around. And it's wealth that nobody can take from you. You lose it only if you throw it away. So again, these are perceptions you can hold in mind. 3. As for the role of karma in understanding happiness, realize that beings are going to be happy not because you wish for their happiness, but because they act skillfully. This is expressed in the Karanya Metta Sutta. Its statement of goodwill starts out, "May all beings be happy at heart," but then it doesn't stop there. It also says, "May they behave skillfully," or more precisely, "Let no one deceive another or despise anyone anywhere or, through anger or irritation, wish for another to suffer." So if other people behave unskillfully, you're not saying, "May you be happy whatever you're doing," you're saying, "May you see the harm that you're causing and give rise to a desire to stop." This relates to what in Thailand is called a high level of metta. This term describes the situation when someone is kind to you in a way that's not necessarily pleasant, but in which they hold you to a higher standard than you might desire. This is an important aspect of metta. We don't just act in a pleasing way. Sometimes we have to say things that are unpleasant for the good of that other person. There's a story in the canon. A group of sectarians called the Niganthas call a prince to them one day and say, "Do you want to become famous?" "Of course. We'll tell you how to do it. We'll get you to ask a question the Buddha can't answer, and that'll make you famous." The question is this: would the Buddha ever say anything unpleasant? If he says no, we have him on record for saying that Devadatta was going to go to hell. That was displeasing to Devadatta. If the Buddha says, yes, he would say things that are displeasing, then you say, well, what's the difference between you and ordinary people in the market? So the prince invites the Buddha for a meal. This, by the way, is why monks have to be careful when accepting invitations. They never know what their hosts have in mind. After the Buddha has his meal, the prince asks the question. The Buddha says, "There's no categorical answer to that question." "Ah," the prince responds, "the Niganthas have been defeated." And he explains the setup. Then the Buddha explains his answer. First, he asks a question of the prince. The prince has brought his baby son to sit on his lap. So the Buddha says, "If your child here got a sharp object in his mouth, what would you do?" The prince replies, "I'd hold his head in one hand and with the finger of the other hand, I'd get the object out, even if it meant drawing blood. Why? Because I have compassion for the child." The Buddha then says that, in the same way, there are times when he would have to say things that are displeasing out of compassion. You can see this point also in the Vinaya. It's not the case that monks sit around smiling at one another all the time. There are issues, and the Buddha has advice on how to deal with issues. Basically, the principle is, if you're going to criticize somebody, 1, you try to show respect, and 2, you show respect by approaching the topic one-on-one first. In fact, you even ask permission, "Can I talk to you about something?" So you show respect, but also you look into your own behavior. If you're guilty of the same fault that you're going to criticize in the other person, you have to get rid of that fault first. Otherwise, if you say, "Did you do X?" the other person is going to say, "So what if I do? You do too." And that's the end of the discussion. So an important part of criticism is in showing respect for the other person. And it is possible to give criticism out of goodwill as long as you do it right. So that's the role of the first determination with regard to metta, which is discernment. Understanding how universal goodwill would lead to your long-term welfare and happiness. Understanding the role of desire in fabricating goodwill. And understanding how to skillfully go about expressing the wish for happiness. The second determination is truth. Here, this basically means that once you've extended thoughts of goodwill, you actually act on them. We talked about the person coming from a metta retreat and then getting cut off in traffic. You're going to go back to a world where everybody seems to be competing in how much they can challenge your goodwill. This is why the Buddha said training in the Brahma Viharas is training in mindfulness. You have to keep them in mind all the time. So the first order of business is to work for your own genuine happiness by following the Noble Eightfold Path. That way, you begin to get more practical experience of what actually leads to happiness. And you're not the only one who will benefit if you do. This point can be illustrated with another verbal and mental fabrication. the image of two acrobats. They set a bamboo pole vertically in the ground. One acrobat gets up on the top end of the pole, and then he gets his assistant to get up on his shoulders. Then the first acrobat tells the assistant, "Okay, you look after me, and I'll look after you. And that way, we'll be able to do our tricks and come down safely from the pole." But the assistant says, "No, that's not going to work. I have to look after myself. You look after yourself, and that way we'll come down safely." The Buddha says that in that case, the assistant is right. You can't maintain someone else's balance, but you make it easier for the person to maintain balance if you maintain your balance. So if you're able to maintain your metta, that helps other people maintain theirs. The Buddha says that the principle also works the other way around. You can look after other people by being kind to them, and that's the same thing as looking after yourself. Being kind to other people involves sympathy, harmlessness, endurance, and goodwill. As you develop these qualities, you too benefit from them. So when you know what things cause true happiness by giving rise to those causes in yourself, you become a good example to others, and you're in a position to offer reliable advice. As for compassion and empathetic joy, as we said earlier, these are applications of metta. Compassion is what metta feels when you see somebody suffering. You want them to end their suffering. Empathetic joy is what metta feels when you see people are happy. You want that happiness to continue. The Buddha gives the example of seeing extremely rich and extremely poor people. These are perceptions you should hold in mind. When you see somebody who's very rich and powerful, you remind yourself, you've been there before. If you see those who are poor, you remind yourself, you've been there before too. If you don't get out of samsara, you could easily be there again. These perceptions help make sure that your compassion doesn't become patronizing. You've been in those miserable conditions too. We had a question the other day about spreading goodwill to beings in the lower realms, whether by thinking of them as being inferior, you're looking down on them. But in the Buddhist universe, as I said, you've been in these realms as well, and you realize how much suffering is involved in being there. So your compassion doesn't have to be patronizing. You may also have some relatives who are down there right now. There was a Brahmin who came to see the Buddha one time. He said, "This merit that I make and dedicate to my ancestors, does it go to them?" Here you have to realize that in India in those days, they would consider people going back 7 generations. In other words, people descended from the great-grandparents of your great-grandparents as related to you. The Buddha said, if they're reborn as hungry ghosts, yes, it would go to them. The Brahmin said, "But what if none of my relatives are hungry ghosts?" And the Buddha said, "Don't worry, everybody has relatives who are hungry ghosts." So when you spread compassion to these beings, it's not that you're looking down on them. You actually have to think of them as your relatives. A similar principle applies to empathetic joy. The perception of the fact that you've been rich and fortunate before helps to make sure that you don't feel resentment for other people's good fortune. Empathetic joy is also a test of the sincerity of your metta when you see the stupidity of those who abuse their good fortune. This is why goodwill is best expressed as a wish for true happiness and acting on the causes of true happiness. That's the determination of truth as it relates to the Brahma Viharas. As for the determination on relinquishment, for your metta to be sincere, you have to relinquish ill will, harmfulness, and resentment. So you have to look for the allure of these things and compare it with their drawbacks so that you can find the escape from them. Finally, there's the determination on calm. you know that not all beings will act on the causes for happiness. Beings are free to choose what they do, say, and think, so they're free to act skillfully or unskillfully. Even the Buddha didn't live to see all beings be happy. Think of the case of the person who cuts you off as you're driving. As I told you the other day, the best thing to think is, may you learn how to drive skillfully. Every day when you get out onto the road, this should be your attitude. May all drivers drive skillfully. The question is, are they all going to drive skillfully? No. So you have to be prepared for those who won't. This is where the practice of the Brahma Viharas focuses on equanimity. Notice that the Buddha doesn't have you start out with equanimity. In all the lists where equanimity appears, it comes last, not because it's higher than the other members of the list, but because it needs their support so that it doesn't turn into defeatism, depression or apathy. Ajahn Fuang made a distinction between what he called small-hearted equanimity and large-hearted equanimity. Small-hearted equanimity basically says, well, I guess I have to put up with this. It's unhappy and a little resentful. Large-hearted equanimity comes from the practice of concentration. When you create a sense of well-being inside, and you realize that your happiness doesn't have to depend on things outside being in a certain way, so you can feel equanimity without being depressed. The Buddha recognizes many levels of equanimity. There's what he calls equanimity of the flesh, in which you say, I won't be reactive to whatever's happening at any of the six senses. As you begin meditation, he told his son, you have to make your mind like earth. You can use this perception to incline the mind not to be shaken by any negative things happening in your meditation. But then, as your meditation progresses, the Buddha says, your equanimity gets a different basis. It comes either from the pleasure of the first levels of jhana, or from the sense of freedom that comes when you gain an insight that lets you put down a burden. Finally, the highest level of equanimity is the equanimity of full awakening. Note that this is not a feeling of equanimity, and it doesn't define awakening. It's an inner stability that comes from having found the happiness of the deathless. You no longer have to feed on the world, so whatever kind of food the world has to offer you, it doesn't bother you. You can face the issues of the world with equanimity. So those are the lessons of the 4 determinations that are used in developing the Brahma Viharas. And what are the lessons you learn from Brahma Vihara practice? One is that happiness doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. A zero-sum game is one in which, if you gain, other people have to lose, or if they gain, you have to lose. But here, you learn that you can find happiness in the happiness of others. In that way, both sides win. The sum of the game can go higher and higher. Happiness comes from within. It's your ability to develop the Brahma Viharas through the 3 kinds of fabrication that allows you to bring a skillful attitude into any situation. And it's that attitude that will constitute your happiness. As I said, it's a wealth that comes from within, and you can make sure that it's independent of whatever happens outside. Sometimes we're told that a sense of an independent self is a bad thing, but actually it can be very useful. If you have a sense that your goodness doesn't have to depend on the goodness of others, then you can trust your goodness no matter what happens in the world. So those are some of the positive lessons you learn from the Brahma Viharas. But also we run into some of the limitations of even these kindest and most sociable of desires. A sociable desire is one that basically says, I want other people to be happy. But you learn some sobering lessons, for example, from empathetic joy. Look at people who are happy. Many of them abuse their good fortune, their power, their wealth, their good looks. In metta practice, you say, May all beings be happy. But this is what happiness looks like when it makes people heedless. You've probably behaved heedlessly in that way in the past too, when you were happy. That's why you're still here. So it's up to you to develop a sense of samvega, a motivation to practice for more total freedom. The lesson you learn from equanimity is that as long as happiness is dependent on conditions, it won't last. Freedom of choice means that beings are free to choose out of ignorance to suffer. This is why the Buddha, when asked if all the world would reach awakening, wouldn't answer. It depends on the choices of beings outside of even his control. This is why the Brahma Vihara practice on its own is not a complete practice. It can't take you totally beyond suffering. So in this world where no one is in charge, it's wise to listen to the Buddha when he says that there are two things not to accept: any unskillful qualities in your mind and the level of your skill, as long as it hasn't reached the end of suffering. This means you have to encourage yourself on the path, taking joy in what you have managed to accomplish and maintain the desire to accomplish even higher things. That's the only way out to total freedom. In the meantime, metta is a form of wealth that's really yours. It leads you to create good karma, and that's the only thing you can take with you when you go. And in taking it, it's not as if you're taking anything away from the world. You're leaving behind good things as well. All the goodness you've done under the influence of goodwill. This is one of the paradoxes of human life. If you leave good things behind, you have good things to follow you as you go. If you try to grab hold of things, they get torn from your grasp.